Hello and welcome to another edition of Meet the Solutionaries on Green TV, where I focus on the solutions with the very people that are in the forefront of various solutions. We need all of them. And one of them is with one of my favorite organizations, the Global Footprint Network. Very happy to have David Lynn, the Chief Science Officer for the Global Footprint Network. And we're going to talk about what's coming up, which is World Overshoot Day, really one of my favorite occasions, can't quite say celebrations, observances, because it really talks in numbers about what is wrong with the way we're consuming resources and what we need to do. So welcome to the program.
Thank you, Betsy. I'm happy to be here and share with you a little bit more about what it is and our solutions.
Let's start with when it is. I think it's been happening earlier each year. I think there might have been a little bit of slowdown during COVID, the prime COVID years. Now we're a little bit mostly out of COVID. So what is the big date that after which something happens, which I'll let you explain?
Of course. The big date is July 28th, and we call that Earth Overshoot Day. And it's really, overshoot's a basic term. It's when something exceeds something else. And the basic principles about what we do are very biological in nature. You could say in layman's terms that humanity and all life lives off the land, and that land regenerates what we consume, whether it's food or wood, or it takes photosynthesis to produce fossil fuels or sequester those emissions from the atmosphere. And when we look at the numbers, we can come up with two numbers: how much we consume and how much the earth regenerates. And if we look at it as two sides of an account, we can say by which date we've exhausted our budget. And it is getting earlier and earlier in the year with every consecutive year, although in the first year of the pandemic, we did have a little bit of a pushback of the date.
So how does this compare with COVID out of the picture, with the last date that we were overshooting after?
So I think it's earlier by a few days this year. And for 2022, we always take estimates based on the forecasts and nowcasts of carbon emissions and different consumption types. The actual data that goes into the results only go up to 2018. So we have to take some estimates about what has happened in the years after.
And I've been covering World Overshoot Day for many years, over a decade. I could be wrong, but I recall it used to be like in September. Am I wrong?
You are right.
Yeah. So it's getting worse, clearly, not surprisingly, but dramatically so.
Right. Overshoot began sometime in the early 1970s, actually. Before that, our consumption and our populations were much smaller, and we grow every year.
And that means that if other countries, if I recall, were to consume as much as we in the United States, superpower that we are, super consumers, super wasters, super emitters that we are, that we would need like 4 or 5 more planets. Is that a correct assessment?
That's right. If everyone consumed like the average person in the United States, we would need quite a bit more in terms of number of planets.
And of course, the old problem is still a current problem, and that's there are developing countries that need to bring up their standard of living and need to use more energy and need to then burn more carbon. And it's not really fair for us to tell them not to when we've overused so much. So how does that look? What do you recommend be done about that? I would imagine some of that involves us reducing our carbon emissions, our carbon footprint, so that they can use a little bit more.
Yeah, and I mean, it's always a big challenge because as a planet, as a species, we are consuming much more than the Earth can regenerate. And I think the focus needs to be on well-being. There are many symptoms of overshoot. We are seeing them more and more in the forefront. They're becoming more immediate. I think everyone notices that with each year. And the question is, if resources are becoming more and more scarce, if we're consuming more and more Earths, you could say, every year, we're headed towards a cliff in a way. But it's not a cliff where you have to fall off. We can, by design, improve things so that we land more safely. So as we move forward, we need to take into account technologies, we need to take into account everything so that we can find the solutions and allow everybody to be part of the solution. Because otherwise, we like to say, overshoot will end by design or disaster. We want to try to shift it towards design and not disaster.
And I'm even seeing extinction used in some articles about, if we like, I just read one today by a very dark but accurate writer on Medium, Umar Haque. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his last name, but I read him and I go, shoot, it's as bad as I thought, because I like to think I'm overreacting somehow. And he says 2050, we're not going to be around by 20. We're not going to make it to 2050 or 2040 or 2030 if we continue consuming with abandon, consuming as if there's no tomorrow, consuming as if there's no climate change. And right now we're speaking in the middle of, record heat waves across not only the US, but in Europe and UK. Temperature records melting, and it's all, of course, because we're heating up our planet through climate change. So it's maybe not so outlandish to use that word extinction. And who wants to go extinct? I mean, we've been talking about, endangered species. We're one of them, we humans, in fact. So maybe it's not too early to start saying that, because if we don't scare people along with things they can do, we can do, that's always been our approach here. Problem solutions, then we certainly will see darker times.
Right. So I think there's a few elements there. There's definitely a science component. 2050 is not that close, but it's not that far. As you know, you've been in the business for quite a while. We've been talking about goals at the international level, intergovernmental level for a long time. And they've come some ways, but it seems like we keep pushing the deadline. Oh, we need to act now. And we've been saying we need to act now for a long time. But one of the challenges to, I think, individuals out there is that the future is uncertain. There are certainties. We know climate change will get worse. We know the population is going to grow. We know that the Earth is not getting any bigger. But I think one of the challenges that we see, especially among young people and even people in the field, is that some people have given up hope and they say, okay, well, if we're going to go extinct, I don't care. I'm just going to do the best I can here, or I give up. I'm going to keep consuming. And I think the way to think about it is not necessarily that. Certainly, there's always some risk. You could say that for certain we'll have nuclear war and we'll go extinct. But I think the way to solutions is to say that every little bit we do more now will have a bigger effect on suffering and improving well-being for the next generation. And in the future, not even the next generation, our current generation. So we need to get over the psychological barrier of, oh, I give up, I resign, because it's inevitable we're going to go extinct.
Especially because for so many years, too much of this country, if not the world, has said, problem, what problem? So how do you find your optimism?
Right. So that's a very good question. How do we maintain optimism? And I think, in a way, I would like to say we maintain realism. There is a future. It's going to come, and there's a way to act prudently about it. And how do we do that? And I think everyone comes from a different place. It can be frustrating to see others maybe feeling that resignation, feeling like it's a distant problem, even though it's becoming more and more immediate. But we can look at these barriers also. We can look at and listen to where people are coming from. but we can treat our actions and solutions as investments. The way you might think long-term about, let's say, retirement, that's a prudent action, and that's an action that preserves our future well-being. And that's an action that everyone can come together around. There is this current focus, and the things that have made us successful as humanity, the ability to draw and extract resources from our environment to improve our livelihoods and well-being. The goal is no different. We still want to improve our livelihoods and maintain well-being, but the extraction is just increasing by a little too much, right? But if we're prudent and we think about it as an investment, that's a message that can resonate with everybody. We want to invest in our well-being. But it's also, how do we deal with these barriers that others might feel? Framing it that way is one very helpful way, but also how do we communicate and interact with others while we listen to where they're coming from in a way that we can inspire them to have agency. So those two approaches, I think, are a way that we maintain our realism. If the future is going to be X, what's going to make us more successful? If we could have seen today, we know that fossil fuels will need to be out in the future. We had a very quick thing happen that made gas prices go up, but a prudent person in the past might have just said, oh, well, if I know fossil fuels are going to be out, I need to find myself in a lifestyle where I don't need to drive a fossil fuel dependent vehicle, or whether that means public transportation or an EV. But anyone who made that decision 5 years ago would be very happy today to see that their investment is paying off.
Yes, we have 2 electric cars and have pretty much they were available, and it does make a big difference. And I was just out in California driving a rental car, and it was just a little Kia, an economy car, cost $80 to fill up. And I said, oh my God, now I have sympathy, but not really, because, well, now that hybrid and electric cars are becoming more affordable, really that's got to be one of the solutions, not the only one. So it must really disturb you. Let's talk about politics for a minute, to see a Joe Manchin continue to hold things up, because of inflation. I mean, inflation is a passing thing. A healthy planet, not so much. It's so maddening, especially because he burned up so much time as the planet's burning. So how do you deal with that? Because that's the kind of thing that just makes those of us who know too much want to just put our heads down and cry. And that this is happening in mid-2022, record heat, climate change has clearly arrived. There's no doubt about it. And then all the Republicans who won't vote for climate action. He's not the only villain here. How do you find hope in the face of that at this very late stage?
Yeah, that's been a big challenge all along, right? As someone who's been involved in climate science from earlier days, we know that we put out the data and people don't respond, or decision makers don't respond as quickly or with the urgency that scientists are putting forth, with IPCC, all of the data that's come forth. So a lot of it is, if we knew how to solve it, we would probably be there. So the first thing I'll say is, we don't know the best way to solve it, but our approach is really to take a prudent approach. I think putting forth the data, no one can dispute that we are getting bigger and that the planet is not getting any bigger. But how do we frame that in a way that we are preserving the success of our state, for instance? If that state is going to invest in fossil fuel infrastructure, that's what we call a stranded asset. Every dollar you spend on improving fossil fuel-based infrastructure is going to be money that could have been spent on an investment that's going to be worth more in the future, but that investment is going to be lost in the future. So while you could have spent time preparing for the future to come, you're spending time wasting your money and further damaging, increasing how quickly we're going to see the effects of climate change. Now, whether that message is going to come across immediately or when it becomes urgent, it really comes down to looking a little further in the future and seeing the trend and focusing on what's going to bring us more security and well-being in the future.
One of the things I've noticed is how little mainstream media in this country covers World Overshoot Day. I've pitched it to a few networks that I was pitching for a show on solutions a few years ago, and they very arrogantly said no. And it's like, that's an interesting story, especially if you haven't covered it every year. It so makes real the problem, the threats, and makes individuals perhaps motivated to do more. And so the fact that they don't want it, which is a symptom of the problem, which is they don't want to upset their viewers, apparently, or their advertisers. What have you found? Is it this country that's particularly bad at bad news?
Yeah, and I couldn't say I could put a finger exactly on why. But there is certainly a lot of negative news in American media, and focusing on the sensational and kind of the negative, and probably they don't want to add more to it.
But I don't let them off the hook for that, because they haven't done much for the 10, 15, 20 plus years I've been covering this. There wasn't so much negative news back then, and they don't hesitate to cover all the negative political news and the divisiveness and all the other problems. They seem to thrive on it. Maybe it's good for ratings, but clearly this is negative news that matters and could use some attention and publicity. But other countries seem to be ahead of us, many of the countries in Europe, for instance. Do you have an example of that?
Yeah, of course. It is extremely popular in many countries in Europe. The ecological footprint they actually have national goals in Slovenia, at the municipal level in Portugal. Germany and Switzerland recognize it and it's very popular. In fact, one year we had an advertisement in Times Square in the United States. We had this beautiful Louis Schwartzberg animation of nature, and it said Earth Overshoot Day is July, I forget, it must have been actually August that year. And we had a reporter on the street interviewing bystanders as they would walk by in Times Square. And they said, "Oh, do you know what Earth Overshoot Day is? It's today." And most Americans did not know what Earth Overshoot Day was, but a family of tourists from Germany came by, and they were the only ones who said, "Oh yeah, of course we know what Earth Overshoot Day is. We learn about it in school, and it is a very important day every year that we recognize, and that humanity has grown and exceeded what nature can regenerate." So whereas it gets huge uptake in Europe, it's relatively quiet in the United States.
Europe, you're much smarter than we are. Really, America, do you really want to be dumber? I mean, it's just so antithetical to how we view ourselves as a country. And yet, I was just in Amsterdam last month, and, they're so green. The boats that, ply the canals up and down every day, every night, are going to be electric by 2025. And they're just doing so much to be green, as a city, as are many Scandinavian countries and Germany and France. They're really all ahead of us. Not that they're perfect, but it just blows my mind that, a country that prides itself on being a superpower in many ways is allowing itself to be super slow when it comes to waking up and smelling the carbon and getting off our gases.
Right.
So what would you recommend people do if they're watching and they want to be more aware of their personal footprint, but also just what they can do in their community, their state, their country, just to, if nothing else, publicize this day, but even beyond that, because I do know that there's a lot of people, especially young people, who want to either change their careers, put a green tint, a green twist on their career, because they sense the urgency, and there's a move to, make every job a climate job. We're not quite there yet, but if this is something that resonates with someone watching, what would you urge them to do?
Right. I think the first thing I would say is, how do we frame this in a way that can appeal to everybody. And so I'll repeat that part again, in that we need to treat this as a long-term investment into well-being, because it is a way to frame things that gets around some of our barriers, some of either our internal barriers or those around us. We're not taking these actions because to show that we're better than the person next to us. Although shame and being a neighbor, being a better neighbor can induce some action. Eventually, one of the most powerful ways to talk about it are in financial terms or well-being terms. So thinking about that is one of the first ways to go about in the world and inspire agency and overcome barriers in others. But in terms of actual solutions, we have a campaign every year that goes along with Earth Overshoot Day, and it's called the Power of Possibility. So again, the main message there is there are hundreds of possibilities out there. There are solutions that exist in the world today that are scalable, that if we implement, that can be implemented and scaled today. We don't need to look for some magic solution out there. They exist today. How can we help these expand? There are 100 ways to get involved. What is the most inspiring to you? And that's sort of our message there. And getting a little bit more specific. So you can find that information on earthovershootday.org. We like to say slow things first. If you think about Europe, if you've ever had a visit there, you think about, oh, I'm walking through these beautiful cities and there's very few cars on the street, on these narrow roads. Oh, there's not freeways and highways going through the middle of cities. So infrastructure lasts for hundreds of years, for centuries, right? Those buildings, the structure of those cities were developed years and years ago, many generations before now, and they have a huge effect year after year on how we consume and use energy. So taking a look at now, where are we investing our money and how can we be involved in shifting that investment to something that's going to preserve our resource security, our well-being in the future? Are we rampantly building roads and highways in places? Is that a prudent investment right now? So slow things first is what we say. Those are the most important things for the long term. Yeah.
I forgot to mention that the biggest wonderful surprise in Amsterdam was seeing so many people on bicycles in the central area, way more bikes than cars. And guess what? People were smiling, they're healthier, there's less obesity. I mean, it really is attractive enough to make my husband, I think maybe if things go south politically, go to Amsterdam, because how nice to be in a community where you don't have this denialism and this, obstructionist attitude and political party dysfunction. And life is too short, man. It's still the same planet threatened by climate change, but to be doing something that not only is healthier for the environment, but yourself seems very attractive. And we're just so far from that in this country. And we need to invest way more in public transportation, public transit, and not so much in cars. So that's why, yes, EVs will help, but it's the whole car culture that is part of the problem in America.
Yeah, but I think you said it exactly right. You just painted a picture of how beautiful a lifestyle could be if you lived there. And I don't think anyone who, I lived in Los Angeles for quite a while, and I couldn't stand being on the freeway. I don't think anyone sitting in rush hour traffic could dispute that their life would be better if you plop them over there. So I think a lot of us can agree on these visions of where we want to go,
really
that are inspiring.
The positive future, as opposed to just doing it out of fear, to think about what's possible. And, it is late in the game for people to be waking up to the climate crisis, but better late than never, because it's not going away. As you said, it's not going to get any better. So thank you for enlightening us. And I don't know if I should say happy Earth Overshoot Day. because obviously the implications are anything but pleasant, but it is a good way to kind of take a snapshot of where we are.
Yeah, I wouldn't say happy over Earth Overshoot Day, but I would say Earth Overshoot Day is happening, but the possibilities to engage are endless, and that's kind of the slogan of our campaign, the power of possibility.
And do you have a hashtag that people can use on Friday, the 28th for?
Yeah, I think it's hashtag Earth Overshoot Day or end overshoot.
End overshoot. That's a good one.
And,
I'll
and
remember
power
that.
of possibility. So you can go to the website, you can go to our calculator at footprintcalculator.org.
Yeah, let's talk about that before we close. How you can calculate your individual.
Yeah, so that's a good starting point for people. You can go to footprintcalculator.org or just Google footprint calculator. Ours will be the most popular one, the top hit. And you can see your personal Earth Overshoot Day if everyone on the planet consumed like you did. It'll give you a breakdown of your carbon footprint. You can look at what proportion of your footprint is associated with transportation, housing, goods and services, and food. And then it should link to a bunch of other resources that afterwards, solutions.
So it's not just your carbon footprint, it's resource use. All of it.
Which includes carbon footprint.
Yes, yeah. Not exclusive to that. There's other elements that go into the formula.
Right, exactly.
So it's pretty comprehensive. Well, thank you so much, David Lynn. I really appreciate the time and the information and the inspiration.
Great, happy to be here and have a great day.
Thank you. And we will do our best to promote World Earth Overshoot Day. And we think it's quite important. And that's what we do here on Green TV. Please remember to click the like button below and subscribe so you don't miss one of my interviews and other content that we post here on Green TV. We are an all-volunteer team right now with very big plans to cover climate and environmental news, much more than any of the news networks are doing and ever will do. But we need the help of viewers like you. So you can find us on many social media sites by visiting greentv.com and following the links both at the top and bottom of each page. Also, if you're looking for ways to improve your channel's SEO, check out our TubeBuddy link below. By using that link, you can help Green TV while improving your channel too. Thank you and have a great Green Day.
Thank you. And thank you for your great work.
Thank you. And we hope you have a successful Earth Overshoot Day. We'll do our part to help.